good morning, everybody, and welcome to a bittersweet day here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, because today marks the end of our Cross Canada virtual road trip. Over the last 4 years, we've had the immense pleasure of getting to partner with the amazing team at Parks Canada and Canadian Geographic Education to showcase and celebrate some of the most amazing stories of Canada's parks and national historic sites coast to coast to coast. This year in particular has been a really wild ride. I really encourage you all, head to our YouTube channel, explore and discover the playlist. There's so many incredible stories on biology, geology, history, culture, and more. Truly coast to coast to coast. We've been to the east, we've been to the west, we've been up to Nunavut. It's been incredible. So please do take the opportunity to check that out as part of our road trip. Now today, before I dive in with our topic du jour, I want to note we are going to have a Kahoot today. So if you want to join us with a little 4-question quiz between our talk and Q&A, the link is below. Please feel free to do that. And what you'll win is the everlasting respect of us and the parks team at our Alexander Graham Bell National Historic Site. So today we are going to the Alexander Graham Bell Museum to talk about the phone, the airplane, the photophone, the famous and not so famous inventions of Canada's foremost inventor, Alexander Graham Bell. I'm so excited for you to see the team there. They are some of the most enthusiastic people I've ever done a test call with in my life. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and take you away to learn about some incredible history and stories. Folks, thank you so much for joining us, and take us away.
So hello and welcome to the Alexander Graham Bell National Historic Site. My name is Debbie. I will guide you through this tour and help you discover the wonderful things that Alexander Bell did. I want to start off by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. They are the guardians of this land, the past, the present, and future guardians, and we thank them for their devotion to this task of theirs. I'm going to talk about Alexander Graham Bell. For those of you who don't know what he looks like, pictured him and his wife Mabel. He was born in Scotland and emigrated to Canada as a young man in Ontario first, and then came here to Cape Breton with his bride and a young family. And that's why this museum is here. His summer home is across the way, across the bay here. And the estate is called Ben Vrea, Gaelic for beautiful mountain. And that was a summer home, but he did spend about 35 years or so of his life here in Quebec, inventing and creating and doing wonderful things between here and Washington, D.C. and Ontario as well. So one question I have for you, what is Alexander Bell known for? His greatest invention. And
I think our classes might well know this, but if you guys want to chime in the chat or live with us, we'll happily go to you, Mr. Hancock. What's Alexander Graham Bell most known for?
That's a good question. What is he known for, everybody?
Of course.
And some of his inventions, possibly, she's saying.
Okay.
Which invention exactly, Robin? Yeah.
I think it was
We forgot, Jesse. We just came in from recess.
Yeah, recess is too distracting. You know what? We've got phone coming in on YouTube, so I think that might be our answer. But if you want to tell us a little bit more, that would be lovely.
Well, whoever said that was right. But I'm wondering if they know what the phone used to look like and what it looks like today, the big difference. So I'll take you around the corner here and we'll see what he's known for. Now, would you have known what any of these things are? Those are early telephones. You might be more familiar with the ones over on that end that might look old to you, but they're actually quite modern. So these are early models of his telephone invention. One thing Bell was not necessarily known for, but all his life, he was a teacher of the deaf. Sound was always important to him. And one of the reasons he actually invented the telephone is because his wife, Mabel, was deaf from the age of 5. She was one of his students early on. And one reason that he was actually working to have the telephone invented, just to discover how it worked, first of all, but then he really worked hard at it because he had to be able to afford to support her when he married her, because he was poor, she was not. So the invention of the telephone sped up faster than normally would have because he was in love with this deaf girl and wanted to marry her. So that's how the telephone came to be invented, what it was in 1876. Now these early models, you actually spoke into a mouthpiece. You'd have this receiver in your ear, and how it would work was through electricity. If you put your hand on your throat like this and talk, you feel the vibration. So what would happen is you'd speak on the phone, the vibration went through the wire, like your throat vibrates now, And that's why you got to hear on the other end because of electricity. Very crude starting off, but that's how it started. Today, we're live streaming. You can video chat with anybody. You can talk with while seeing them, which is something we couldn't do back then. But Bell did predict we could actually do that one day, and here we are today. Now, this beauty here is called a party line phone. That crank up there, this would be maybe 15 people on the same line, or maybe as many as 20, and you each have your own ring, longs and shorts. And so if you rang the number, it went to everybody's house on the street. So they knew whose phone number was ringing. And if you were a bit sneaky, you could just pick up the receiver and eavesdrop on the conversation. Not very polite to do, but basically the early version of Facebook, everybody knows your business. So that's the early version. Everything old is new again. So this was one of his great inventions, one that made him famous, but he was known for a few more things, maybe not quite as famous for that, but still very creative. I will take you around this corner to show you his work with the Photophone. His work with sound carried out throughout his life because he was a teacher of the deaf, and sound was always something that was important to him, how to figure it out, how to transmit it, how sound functions. So what we have over here is called the Photophone. Sound transmission without wires, which back in that day was not something that existed. There was telephone lines everywhere. So how this basically functioned is sunlight would hit the mirror. It would go through these things as well. You could see the sound waves going through. And this worked very well as long as there were no buildings in the way, other obstructions, if there was no clouds in the sky, this kind of thing would actually work. It did not work out for him because of these obstacles. And this actually is the beginnings of what you're enjoying today, wireless technology. In the 1970s, with the invention and creation of fiber optic cables, we now have wireless transmissions. So what you're enjoying today, your cell phone, your computer, all this wireless technology started with this, the Photophone, which came out of Volta Labs in Washington, D.C. His cousin Charles Sumner and other works with him out of Washington, D.C. And this is what they worked on, different inventions, different creations. And he always worked with a team. He didn't invent anything by himself. When you go to create something, there's always somebody at the forefront who gets famous for it, but there's a whole team of people behind that person. And he had the sense to know that he did not understand certain technical things or other stuff like that. Mabel, his wife, always told him to find young people who had the technical knowledge or skill to do certain things, which is why when Thomas Watson was hired to work with him, he was an electrician, he knew about electricity. Bell did not know how to create what he had in his head, but other people would help him achieve that goal. So teamwork was always very important for him. Now, a cute story with this one, at the same time the Photophone was born, so was his second daughter. And he had the bright idea to name her Photophone. But his wife Mabel had more sense than that, so she said no, she would be called Marion, known as Daisy. So the name Photophone Bell back in those days would have been a very strange name. Today, not so much maybe, but back then it would have been odd. But that tells you how his brain was working. So don't let your husband name your children. I will take you through this way to start working with flight. The one thing that he always wanted to do as a young boy in Scotland, he watched birds fly. And he wanted to know how come birds can fly, but man cannot. So here you see some of the models of propellers that he did later on in his life to figure out how to get a plane in the air. But it all started when he was just a boy, your age or even younger. Here we see Bell with one of his grandchildren, and that's a toy, the whirligig. If you've seen these before, they look like this. And what you do is you just roll it like that in your fingers, and when you let it go like this, it should go up and twirl around and land somewhere, which we're not going to do in here because it's a museum, there's artifacts around, and this is an outside tour. If you do that indoors, someone might get hit, you might break something, and that will not be good. But you'll see this later on. We'll talk about it later if you want to. I'll take you through this way. Now, in this picture here, that's an actual kite. It has white fabric on it. It's shaped. It's basically 3 triangles put together, makes a 4-sided shape. It's called a tetrahedron. And that's what he used to fly kites because it was lightweight, it was sturdy, and he could figure out how to get a man in the air, starting with that. For him, though, because he always observed and always wrote down and took pictures and everything, he couldn't observe this very closely because against the sky, the white didn't show up very well. So here we have some beautiful red silk kites. Where did he get the red silk, you might wonder? Well, his poor, suffering wife, Mabel, patient woman that she was, ordered a bolt of red silk from Europe to make a dress for herself. And he went in the house one day looking for material to make the kite, and there was the bolt of red silk. So a few days later, there's kites flying in the air, but there's no red silk dress for Mabel. So she was a very patient woman. When we go up to here, we now go to the last hall, our work with flight and with the hydrofoil. So all this work with kites led to building an airplane, which was his actual goal. And how he achieved this, again, with teamwork. He started the Aerospace Association. Mabel was involved. She funded it. There was Alexander Graham Bell, Douglas McCurdy, a local person, was an engineer. His friend Casey Baldwin, also an engineer. Glenn Curtis, from Hemingsport, New York, who built motorcycle motors and engines. And also Thomas Selfridge from the American Army. He was brought in to observe the experiments because at this time, flight was just coming into being and it was becoming a thing for basically warfare and whatnot. So here we see the silver dart. It's called that because the silver materials on the wings, and because it shot in the sky really fast, it went through the air really fast, it darted through, called the silver dart. The innovations for this one included the tricycle undercarriage. You will see the nice flat seat where the pilot sat and the wheel to steer, and his feet would be on the board to control the direction of the plane. There were no brakes on this thing, so whenever you landed, you just kept going till you ran out of air and speed and came to a stop. Also, the ailerons at the tip of each wing. I will walk you over here to get a better look at them. These are innovations and improvement over other flights happening, and people were flying all over the world. This was not something new as far as flying was concerned. There was flying going on in Europe, in New Zealand, in the States, all over the place. He didn't invent the plane, but he certainly developed a better one. And if you look across the way here, you can now see the tip of the wing, the aileron. You can control the lift of the plane and direction by dropping them down or lifting them up. So that's why the technology became very important. You can see that it was a very directional thing. Now, with this invention, once you got that going, it was February 23rd of 1909 that the plane flew across here in Bedeck Bay on the frozen water, the frozen lakes. And at that time, that was the first time anybody saw a man up in the air. Flight was very new. It was being created. And picture being in Bedeck on that cold day in February, bundled up to watch a man take to the air. Today, when you fly, it looks very different from this, obviously. There's nothing on this that you recognize as a plane that could fly. But you have to realize that they had to invent these things and create them and think of them. So this silver dart is a 2009 silver dart, a recreation of the original one. So the pilot who flew this one, the original was Douglas McCurdy, but the pilot who flew this one was an astronaut from Canada, and he said he flew the fastest plane and the slowest one. He got to go on the space shuttle and the space station. So this was slow, that was fast. He was quite pleased with that. And what we had to do for this plane, because now we have safety regulations, was we had to put a bucket seat with some harnesses on it for safety. We had to put brakes on the plane. And he added this third option, which I thought was quite genius, spot for his Tim Hortons coffee cup. So he had his Timmies while he was flying. So as you can see, it was quite innovation at the time to think of all these things and to try to create them and make them work. It took a lot of ingenuity and a lot of teamwork. So Glenn Curtis was brought in because he built motorcycles and motors. So his technology was involved, his knowledge. The engineers, McCurdy and Baldwin, and Selfridge observed for the U.S. Army. Now, if you look down behind the back wall, we see the hydrofoil. That was basically both an airplane and a boat. It was designed like an airplane, but also as a boat to skim the surface of the water. That was meant to chase submarines. And how they could go undetected is because of the foils. It would skim the surface of the water. You see the one on the very back hall. That's the original hydrofoil. Bell worked on this up until 1914, and then the First World War started, so he stopped the experiments. He resumed in 1917, and by 1919, he actually succeeded in getting it to work. It did a speed of 113 kilometers an hour, which at that time was a terrific speed. Today, that's basically a slow lane on the highway, I think. And this was actually left on the beach to decay and rot because nobody wanted to buy it, so he just left it there. He was quite disheartened by that. Parts Canada rescued this in the 1970s. The family gave the artifact to Parts Canada. So based on Bell's design and his plan and schematics, Parts Canada rebuilt the hydrofoil in the 70s in this hall. So you could actually watch them construct it. There are Liberty engines on top. There are 350 horsepower motors with no mufflers. So when this thing bombed across the bay in Bedeque in 1919, it scared the local livestock. The cows took off for the hills. They wouldn't milk. The chickens wouldn't lay. The local farmers and local people were not thrilled at all. And the pilot of that hydrofoil was actually deafened for several days after driving it, because back then hearing protection was not a thing that they knew about until way later. So you'll see the white foils down there. So basically how it works is you pick up speed, the water goes between the foils, and it picks up the body of the boat above the water until it just skims the surface. So the sonar cannot detect it because there's no actual body on the surface of the water to detect. And this apparently is a functioning model. We've never tried it out, so we don't know. But think of the innovation to think of that. And he was in his 70s at the time. So the man never stopped inventing, never stopped creating, never stopped thinking of things to do and invent and create. I will take you over here to this side and show you this really great picture. Bell himself never got on the plane, on the boats. He never did the experiments. He preferred to observe, record, and document and figure out what worked and what didn't. So here he is on the wharf waiting for the hydrofoil to come in. So Casey Baldwin took it on a little ride with Mabel as a passenger. And if you remember, I told you she was deaf, so the noise of the mufflers not being there didn't bother her. It was very loud, but she could feel the vibration. And they did one tour around the bay, and then she decides to get at the controls. So she drove this thing across here, having a wonderful time for herself, because she could feel the vibration, the movement, so it was quite thrilling for her. And that's a picture of Bell patiently waiting for her to return to the shore, safe and sound. So that shows you how she was also involved with his work throughout their life together. She did finance the Aerospace Association and became the first woman in North America to fund a scientific experiment. And throughout their life together, he actually consulted with her and asked her advice and her opinions, and was very much a partner in his life. And one thing that she did say to him was, don't basically dumb down your ideas, explain to me what it is you're trying to do, and I'll try to understand it in my own way. So she's the one that was actually bringing him down to earth sometimes and helping him get out of his own head to think outside the box, even though there wasn't a box for him. It was just free thinking all the time. So we are going to go over to this area of the museum. We have something called a white glove room where we keep artifacts. Bell was very keen on reusing, repurposing, and recycling everything. So there were buildings full of stuff over on the estate that we got from the Bell family. And I will take you in here now. Excuse the noise. And we have certain artifacts we can show you if you're interested to see them. And we can talk about some of the wonderful things he was doing. So one thing when you are inventing and creating, and that's something you want to think about, what would you invent and create that would be innovative or would improve what's already here or just create something new? What kind of inventions do you think you'd come up with if you were to create something and invent something? What do you think that might be?
I think we're ready for questions.
Ooh, well, we'd absolutely love to hear your guys' thoughts on inventions for everyone in our YouTube and StreamYard chat. We are going to dive into our little Kahoot first before we dive into the Q&A, but I want to say a big thank you to you both for taking us around on this amazing journey. What a cool museum you have, too. I want to come visit as soon as I can. I might have to hop on the next flight when this is done. Let's bring up our Kahoot, folks, to kick us off and get us underway. If you're new to Kahoot, the faster you answer, the more points you get. And museum team, if you want to help us out with some of these answers and give us hints when there's a few seconds to spare each time, you are more than welcome to chime in. But I'm going to give our classes just a second to queue up and get involved. If you want to use that game pin, 873-6023, that would be fantastic. A bunch of you are coming in. That's awesome. And then we are going to dive in together. By the way, my favorite commentary in the chat during the whole thing was that with the telephone, Skip the Dishes would not exist without Alexander Graham Bell. So thank you for that, Ms. Coburn. We're going to dive in with our Kahoot. If you want to join after we get underway, that's totally fine. But we're going to start off with our first question as Eddie gets the white gloves on. That's very exciting. Ooh. All right. 3, 2, 1 for our first question. Let's see where it goes. Drum roll. When was the first phone call in history? Now, early on, we talked about when the phone was invented. Is it 1923, 1751, 1876, or 1941? Get that answer in. We are nearing the 150-year anniversary of dropped calls or call waiting. I don't know. Oh, a few. Ooh, we missed people up a little bit there. Not 1923. Before that, almost 50 years before that, 1876. March 10th is our first phone call. Way to go to the few of you that got that right. Witty Chicken takes our lead. So we go to question 2. Bell's wife and mother were what, which hugely influenced his life and inventions? We talked about this for quite a bit. Blind, deaf, or mute? We've got a little picture that might give you a little hint here. So let's see, get those answers in. 10 more seconds, folks, 10 more seconds. Oh, and pretty much everyone got this right. So deaf, which is, again, speaks to the quite a few of his innovations and inventions after that. Everyone got that in really quick. Way to go. All right, question 3. And then soon we're going to questions, folks. So whatever questions you have, get them ready for our team. The photophone allows for transmission of speech via, this is a bit of a tricky one, sound, electricity, vibes, or light. I'll tell you that these sort of things, whenever you actually think about how a phone works or how cell phones work or how fiber optic cables work, it is basically black magic. Like, it is quite astonishing. The answer is light. Way to go to the 3 of you that got that right. But the fact that we can send signals in general in different forms and pick them up, in some cases, literally around the world, is as astonishing now as it was in 1876. All right, Bell contributed to the development of airplanes by using rockets, kites, bicycles, or cars. What do we think? Maybe rockets weren't quite invented when he was around. That was a later development. But kites is our correct answer. Way to go, everyone. Most of you got that right. That's awesome. Let's see what that does to our podium. And then we are heading to Mr. Hancock's class first in our Q&A. Let's see. Classy Egret is 3rd. Witty Chicken is 2nd. And first for all the marbles is Flying Dingo, why not? Which is inexplicably a horse with an ice cream cone on its head in the picture. Thank you, everyone, for playing along. That was a lot of fun. And we're going to dive in with questions. So, Georgetown, Mr. Hancock's class, if you guys want to kick us off with the first query, I'll come to you. Ms. Coburn, I'm coming to you next. And YouTubers, please do feel free to share all those questions in the chat. Hey, Mr. Hancock.
Congratulations to the Flying Dingo. Us Witty Chickens came 2nd. We're proud of our hard work over here. We were wondering where he got his materials from and his ideas from.
Ooh, sorry. Oh, my thing's giving me trouble. There we are. You're back. You're good to answer that.
So most of his materials were sourced locally. The wood was harvested from the local trees. He could actually get materials like fabrics and whatnot from the local area. Back in the day, you'd order stuff from Boston or Halifax or whatever, like just for everyday stuff. And things like motors and technical gear like that would have to come from somewhere else. So when he went to Hammondsport to where we went Curtis, the motors came from there. So basically anything that could be locally sourced, if you could get materials here, the local area, that's what it came from, and otherwise you would order it in from other places.
His ideas.
And the
Pardon
idea,
me?
yeah.
His ideas.
His ideas,
Where did he
they
come
just
from?
came to him. He sometimes dreamt ideas. There was one story where he was thinking about kites and flying and how to get flying going. And he got word that one of his grandchildren was born, and his valet woke him up to tell him he was a grandfather again. And the first thing he said was, "Can it fly?" So that tells you what his brain, what level his brain was functioning at. The man just thought of things by observing, by seeing, and sometimes just things came into his brain, and where they came from is anybody's guess.
I have never dove in with his story quite to the degree that I did in this broadcast, but I've got to say, every time I hear about his work, it's just like, I can't even believe how lazy I am. Like, I'm just astonished that I need to get on it after this broadcast. I'll go try and figure out something. Great answers, guys, to kick us off. Miss Coburn's class, they're our Dalewood, Ontario crew. I'm going to bring them in to take us away. Hey, Miss Coburn.
Hi, how you doing? We have some students who are passionate about music, and they were researching Bell, and they were wondering. It actually says he was a professional pianist. Is that true?
Sort of, but not really. He did learn classical piano and could have been a classical pianist if he pursued that interest. But he did play classical piano all his life. And in the evenings when the grandkids and the kids were going to bed, they'd be upstairs going to sleep to him playing classical music and Scottish tunes on the piano. He played the piano all his life and could have been a professional classical pianist if he wanted to.
As one does. You know, yes, if I stopped being an inventor, I could have done this. And maybe in sports star too. I think he could have probably been like world dunk champion at basketball if he really wanted to at this point.
But he was 3, so you know.
Thank you for that answer. We've got one coming in online, and then we're going to head back to our live classes. YouTubers, don't be shy. Please do share more. Was there an invention that Bell considered his signature invention? Like, we all think of the phone. Was that the same for him? Was there something that he thought was his most genius innovation?
I think he believed the Photophone was better than the phone, just because of wireless communication. And it's unfortunate it didn't work out for him. But the way his brain worked, when he invented something, he just dropped it and went on to the next thing. So 50 years after the phone was invented, when there's a big to-do about the anniversary, he was wondering, this blasted telephone, I still have to talk about the telephone. Mm-hmm. So in his brain, while it gave him his wealth and allowed him to invent other things, it was just like, oh, for God's sake, that phone again.
They keep talking about it.
Family gatherings, it was like, that blasted telephone.
That's so funny. Thank you so much for that. That's a riot. So the Photophone is our answer. By the way, there's tons of additional resources on Alexander Graham Bell Online. So if you want to keep the learning going, classic, please. 45 minutes is not near enough to cover such an incredible life. So look up some great resources and keep the excitement going. We're going to head back to Mr. Hancock's class for another question. Come on in and take us away.
Yeah, one of our students was wondering, when was he born? What did he pass away from? And what period of his life did he invent the most things?
Ooh. Well, he was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1847. He was the middle of 3 sons, and they were brought up to they were homeschooled basically, and he went to public school when he was 10, and he never graduated university. He was just smart the way he was. He invented all his life, actually, because as a boy, his father told him to do something useful, so he'd get in trouble, as boys do. So he and his friend invented a machine to separate the corn husk. The wheel beat around to beat off the shaft of the corn, and that was his invention. And many, many years later, he went back to his homeland, and that piece of machine was still being used. So he invented all his life, little things, big things. He never stopped inventing. He was still inventing on the day he passed away. He did pass away from complications of diabetes. Back then, there was no insulin or medical treatment. You just had to watch your diet. And that was a challenge for him because late at night, he was up all night. He slept very little during the day, and he was a night owl. And he liked to raid the pantry all the time. And Mrs. Bell tried to lock the pantry so he couldn't get in, but he somehow found a way to find his way to his sweets. So there you go. And he was 75. And he was 75 years old when he passed away.
Perfect. I'm both mortified at the fact that I got up to have 4 chocolate chip cookies yesterday now. And as you pivoted that picture to the horse and carriage, I'm almost convinced that he invented the horse. We're going to get to that maybe in a second broadcast, and maybe not. We're not quite sure on the horse invention trick. Ms. Coburn, you had a great question in the chat, but if you want to come in live and share it, by all means.
Absolutely. I have some grade 8 students here who are looking to volunteer next year, and they're really liking the museum thing. We were at the Hamilton Art Gallery in Hamilton, and they're looking for volunteer jobs. Is there anything that any advice you could give them to get into that field, like the museum life?
You can take courses online. You can actually contact us, and we know people who would know stuff like this. I'd say go take courses, try to get jobs where it might not even be a related field. It might be something totally different that will connect you to people. That's one thing Belle always did, is you talk to somebody who talks to somebody else, who talks to somebody else, because somebody knows something you don't, and it's how you connect with people. So I'd say go to an art gallery, talk to a technical school, an art school, find out how to get into that business. And that's one thing that we are connected to here, because Mabel was a very talented artist. And we do have some of her works here. And this summer, actually, there's going to be an exhibit coming up, that bare wall ramp that we walked up later on. It'll be on later on this month for the rest of the year. We do have art exhibits because Mabel was a very talented artist.
I'm so glad you took such a large opportunity today to feature Mabel's work. Whenever you look up Alexander Graham Bell in any context, Mabel's like half the show because she was such an incredible woman. So I'm really appreciate that. Thank you so much, guys. We're going to head back to our live class for one more round in just a minute. But I wanted to highlight if there was sort of a, how do I even say this? You know what? I'll skip that. I'll come back to it. I've lost it entirely. Mr. Hancock, if you guys want to come back in with another question, I will turn it over to you. Take it away.
Sure. We all have those moments, Jesse. One of our students was wondering that while he was alive, was he really famous, or did his inventions become famous after he passed away?
Interesting.
It took a couple of years after the telephone invention for him to make some serious money. But once the phone lines started going up and people had phones in their houses and everything, he became very, very, very famous. And it bothered him in a way because everywhere he went, he was a star. He was a celebrity. And that interfered with his being home in the lab or somewhere working on his stuff. He had all these social obligations because he was part of high society. And, you know, if they had red carpets back then, he'd have been on the red carpet everywhere. He'd be very famous, like Elon Musk or Professor Hawking or all those famous people. He was definitely a celebrity of his time, and he was very famous right till the day he died. And when he did pass away, it was worldwide news. But here in Badette is why he liked to be here. People didn't treat him like a famous person. He was just Mr. Bell and his fabulous wife who worked in the community. They employed a lot of people here. They dressed very casual clothes and lived like normal people. They had no celebrity lifestyle here. I compare that to if that was today, there'd be paparazzi and drones all over the place on the estate because you'd have no 2 seconds of peace. He came here to get away from being a famous person, basically, and having time to work on what he wanted to work on.
What a fascinating answer. I've never heard that in any context before. That's very, very cool. We thought of the question, what did he use that fame for? So he's famous, he's big news. Is he putting it towards anything? Is he putting his money towards any philanthropic efforts? Is there any way in which he gave back to the community outside of it, just his innovations?
Well, the one thing he developed and decided on is if you go to Washington, D.C., and you see the Volta Bureau, that's the Work for the Deaf. He funded that and started it because working with the deaf was his lifelong passion and his lifelong work. He was also one of the founders of the National Geographic Society. He's the guy that took a very dry scientific magazine for geeks and nerds, sciencey people, and turned it into an everyday magazine for people like us to read to learn about the world. So when you see the Geographic, you'll see Bell's face everywhere because he's one of the founders. So he was using his money and his ability to help people to do just that. And his concept of money was like he had it to spend. He wasn't thinking about it. That's why his wife was handling it. When he married her, he gave her all but 10 of the shares of the phone company stock. So she was the one with the purse strings, not him. And she had to keep reminding him, these things cost money. So there you go. She was the brains behind that operation. He did use his money to help people, absolutely. But everything he did was to basically do something to just help people in their everyday lives, to make life better for them.
Yeah, what a story. Holy, this is very cool. I'm very curious because this is a personal question. I'm Canadian, born in Canada. We talked about him being born in Scotland, but he does a lot of his innovations and key discoveries in Canada. What did he consider himself? Did he consider himself Canadian, Scottish, bit of both? What's the deal?
Well, okay, so he was born in Scotland, so he was a British subject. He did not become a Canadian citizen. After he moved to Ontario, after about a year and a half or so, he went to Boston to start teaching the deaf. And after many years of being there, after the phone invention, he became a U.S. citizen in 1888, I believe is the date. So he was a British subject and U.S. citizen, but spent most of his time here. So for him to become a Canadian citizen, he would have had to give up one or the other, which he didn't want to do. So he basically, he was definitely Scottish born and had a deep attachment to here. And he didn't really think of himself in any particular way, except maybe being a citizen of the world, because he traveled all over the world and saw everybody. But he was very tied to his homeland, as most Scottish people are, and very tied to Cape Breton as well.
Very, very cool. Thank you for that. I've always wanted to know that. Miss Coburn's class, we're going to wrap up with one more from you. Time flies and you're having fun in these broadcasts. So we're going to take one more live question before we wrap up. Miss Coburn, if you're still around, let's see. Oh, the fun of virtual broadcasting. Sometimes people disappear. Well, Mr. Hancock's class, I can head to you guys. If you want to take one final question, come on in and take us away.
Absolutely. We were wondering how many total inventions would you say he did? And at what point did his wife pass away? Before him, after him, and what did she pass away from?
Okay, well, first of all, he has 33 patents. There's always somebody on the patents with him for telegraphy, the telephone, all these other things. So 33 patents are registered to him. And his wife passed away 5 months after he did. We believe it was pancreatic cancer. And at the time that he passed away, she had glaucoma. So she relied on reading lips to communicate. And he also wrote in her hand when they were talking privately. So after he passed away, she lost that communication. She had a hard time reading lips. So besides being widowed and lonely from that grief, she also had the challenges of not being able to see to read lips. So that was quite a lonely time for her. So she went to stay with her daughter Daisy in Washington, D.C. after he passed. And she died, what we think is pancreatic cancer. So she was brought back to Benbrea a year later. He died on the 2nd of August of 1922, and buried 2 days later on top of Benbrea Mountain. And she was brought to be buried at his side on the anniversary of his burial in 23. And it was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because that was the time of day that she'd go get her husband and make him stop working and go for a walk with her. And they talk about their day, what he was doing, what she was doing. They trade ideas and talk about stuff. And that was their private time together. So it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon when they had their burial. So he died of diabetes complications, and she died, we think, of pancreatic cancer, just 5 months after he did. He died in August of 22, and she died in January of 23.
This has been such an in-depth and exciting program today. Is there any final message you want to share with our kids about Alexander, about Mabel, about the museum, anything to leave us with before we wrap up and say farewell?
Well, if you come to visit us in time, I'm wearing the black gloves because of the artifacts we have here. Belle saved everything, didn't throw anything away, some really cool stuff in here. But one thing I want to show you is photography. Now, you think because you've got this fancy camera and the iPads and whatnot, you're taking like 1,000 pictures of yourself and you make funny faces, and you think that's something new. It's not. Here's Belle doing a selfie in England, in Scotland, when he was a child, making funny faces for the camera. And back then, that camera wasn't a common thing to have. It was a very rare thing to have a camera. So for him to spend time mugging for the camera was quite fun.
That is an all-time great picture in the history of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. Thank you so much for that. And team, we are going to say farewell. Ms. Coburn, Mr. Hancock's class, all our YouTubers, we really appreciate you joining in today. Have a wonderful day, teachers, and we'll see you all soon.